Hello, so I should be live now. I feel a bit far away from the screen. Hopefully, I'll be okay. Um, Good to see some of you here already, having a bit of a discussion in the live chat. Um, let's start this kind of properly. If you find this interesting or helpful, feel free to give it a thumbs up. If you're new here and want to subscribe and find that you want more of this content, then feel free to subscribe. Click the bell notification icon if you want to be notified when things happen. And after this is aired, feel free to leave comments below if you have any comments on anything. What else was I going to say? Can't remember. I'm sure it will come to me. So, yeah, thanks everyone for joining me here again for another sleep meditation creation session. This will work like normal. The first 15-20 minutes or so we'll be catching up, discussing things, settling into the session, me getting any yawning out of the way, hopefully. I always say that and yawn because I'm saying it in my head before I say it out loud, and that makes me yawn. And then at half past, as close to half past as possible, I will start whatever the sleep meditation will be. I don't know what it is ever until I'm given a page of suggestions by yourselves. And then with those suggestions, I obviously just create something, and I never know what it is. And it's always a bit nerve-wracking having to do that week after week, trying to sort of always thinking when's going to be the day that I mess up. So I'm sure it'll happen one day, and I'm sure it'll go fine. So yeah, hopefully everyone's okay. Since I moved this microphone, I moved it because I wanted to be able to turn the gain down. So that's the lower the gain is, the less background noise there is for me to have to edit out. So I wanted the microphone closer to my mouth, where it was before. It was on the ground on, I'm not going to pick it up because I'll probably bring everything down, but on a stand on the ground. And so it was a good, I don't know, half an arm's length, maybe a whole, actually, given that's the length of my arm, it was a whole arm's length because it was where my hand reaches. So it was a whole arm's length away from my mouth before I moved it up here. Now it's a hand's length away from my mouth. But by doing that, I've had to put it back on a bigger stand. And the reason I wasn't using this big stand for a while was because it was nice being able to have the light in front of me slightly off to the side. Right now, it's straight into my eyes, so all I can see is a screen of spots. So yeah, it's just trying to read questions. Which wizard story? Did I have a story with a wizard in? I don't remember. I can't remember the last story with a wizard in. I know the story I edited today has a wizard mentioned. Oh, Healing the Wizard. Yeah, that one. Where I have you healing the wizard as an excuse, really, for me to do the My Friend John technique, which is a technique I've discussed before. So the My Friend John technique is an Ericksonian technique where you essentially hypnotize someone by telling them how to hypnotize someone or telling them the experience that someone had. So you'd say, for example, oh, my friend John came in, asked the other day, how do you do hypnosis? And I said, well, or what does it feel like to go into hypnosis? And I said, well, what happens first is you just take a moment to close your eyes. And then after you've closed your eyes, you notice that your breathing begins to relax. And then you hypnotize the person while they're nodding along, thinking, okay, so what happens after that? So they think you're just explaining how to do it, but in fact, you're doing it on them, not explaining it. So that's the My Friend John technique. And obviously, it works for other things like, someone came in the other day and told me you're a complete dick. That's a My Friend John technique. You're calling someone something while telling them that you're telling them a story about something else. So it's quite an effective technique. I don't know why you'd be floating from the ceiling. Sounds fun. But yeah, so the idea of it, and the reason why it's quite nice to use it in stories, is that you can introduce something as this is relating to this character. Like you could do a meditation story and say, they asked, how do you meditate? And so the monk said, just take a moment to sit comfortably and take a few deep, purposeful breaths, or whatever you happen to be doing. You can then do that to the listener. They'll follow along to it because they're following the story, but they then follow along to the actual experience because you're guiding them through an experience with the story. So it's something I obviously use quite a lot in my stories, but sometimes very overtly, like the Healing the Wizard one, where I did it for an extended period of time, and other times it's very brief, where I might change from, say, first person to third person or whatever, or third person to first person, and do little bits and pieces, depending on what I'm trying to do. And I've received an early birthday present, which is very nice and kind. People have hypnotized me, not very often. It's irritating that people worry about hypnotizing me because they worry that if they make a mistake, I'll notice that they've made a mistake. So the number of people that I say, who I know are very good at hypnosis, who I'll say, will you hypnotize me? And they'll say, well, what if I make a mistake and you notice that I'm getting it wrong? And I just think, it's not about individual mistakes. It doesn't matter if you could have worded something slightly differently or better, or you've accidentally said something that, like, for example, saying don't think of whatever it happens to be. If you kind of know that what they mean is think of something else, then you just go with it. So it's not really a problem, someone making a couple of mistakes during hypnosis, but people worry about it, and so they don't hypnotize me. So I don't get hypnotized very often by others. I have to listen to myself doing it. But people do from time to time do it. Sometimes I'll meet people that will say, yes, I'm up for this. The sensialization experience over on the Mind Changers channel hasn't got a huge number of views yet, but at least the channel's hit 1,000 subscribers now, which is quite nice. So sensualization, obviously, as those of you who've been to the Mind Changers and watched David's stream will know, and you'll know I do this anyway with my stuff, is that normally guided visualization, or whatever it happens to be, is focused on what you can see. David's view, this is going back many years, like early 2000s or whatever, perhaps even before that. David's view was very much, it's more effective when you bring in all of the senses and give people a multi-sensory inner experience. So you give them things that you're sort of asking them to notice things in their mind's eye that are visual, auditory, kinesthetic, gustatory, olfactory, etc. I do that obviously with all my stuff anyway, because it is true. It is far deeper an experience if you bring in all of the experience, all of the senses, and you talk about what something feels like to touch, what something feels like against you, what it feels like to be breathing, etc., as well as what it sounds like, and a whole host of these bits and pieces. But yeah, I have it shared on the community tab, but I know not everyone sees community tab posts. And I know myself, I was going to pick my phone up then, but I've put it across the other side of the room. But I know myself that I sometimes see YouTubers' community posts, like they'll do a poll or something, and I'll see it 5 days after it posted, and a couple of days after, say it was like, which one of these 5 videos should I post next? I'll see it like after I've already watched the video that came out of the poll. So I know that YouTube isn't very good at showing people things like that on time. Yeah, I haven't been to a beach for months and months and months. I look forward to it at some point. But yeah, so the sensualization, sort of my one, David has got one as well that he did years ago. The one I made, I just thought, let's do an updated one and do one myself, like in my own voice and everything. It's very similar to the rest of the stuff I do. It's essentially just a multi-sensory experience, and then there's sound effects just to aid in that experience. So the idea is that, obviously, hence me liking sound effect versions of my stories, the idea is that you can have the sound of waves, and because you can hear the waves, you can then obviously pick up on the it's easier to then visualize it because you can hear it, kind of thing. Yeah, if you can hear seagulls, it's easier to then feel like I'm in that experience. Yeah, that was why I went live. The week I had to cancel the live stream, which was irritating to have to cancel it, but personal circumstances always come first, and it's taken a long time to get to a place where I think that, because normally it's no, I've said this is happening. It doesn't matter what. Like, for example, when my dad died, I refused, on the day that he died, I refused to stop teaching hypnotherapy. I was teaching a diploma at the time, and as far as I was concerned, I wasn't going to stop teaching just because my dad had died. Dad was okay with that because I'd spoken to him regularly and I'd spoken to him beforehand. And his mindset was very similar to mine. Was, you said you're going to do it, so do it. So yeah, so it takes a lot for me to get my mind into, let's break a pattern, or let's stop doing something I've said I'm going to do because something bigger has cropped up. I've in the past had people walking me into work over their shoulder, sort of propping me up on the shoulder to get me into work because I'm really, really ill and unable to physically stand or see. And my view is that's not a good enough reason not to be in work. And so I've then gone into work. So it takes an awful lot, or in the past, it's taken an awful lot to put other things ahead of just getting on with doing things that I've already said I'm going to do. But that's obviously not healthy. So I'm always trying to learn. Exactly. That's exactly what I was told. When I turned up to work, my manager was off to Australia 2 weeks later. She said, "You're going home. I don't want whatever you've got because I'm off to Australia in 2 weeks. And the last thing I want, she has a daughter in Australia. So the last thing I want is to not be able to do my once a year trip to Australia because I've got whatever you've got because you were stubborn and came into work when you should have stayed home." So yeah, I was sent home that day. So it's taken a long time to get over myself a bit. But yeah, so because of all of the lockdown stuff going on in the world, somebody, a friend from Poland, had sent Abby and myself birthday gifts. So Abby for April and me for August, but sent them. They arrived the other day, so late for Abby, but then there's a big lockdown, and early for me. And for me, it was a purple pen. So I have a purple fountain pen to write with now, which is good. First thing I did was got my fingers messy with purple ink to get the ink into the pen, but most of the ink is in the pen. So yeah, you're right. It is a purple pen. Purple ink in a purple pen. So there was purple ink that came with it as well. Not just a purple pen. But yeah, I think so. One thing you may have noticed is that my next guided sleep meditation is going live at 11 p.m. UK time tomorrow night, rather than 4 a.m. UK time on Wednesday. So normally they go live at 4 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, because when I look at my analytics and see what time people watch them, most people watch the sleep meditations from UK times. They watch the sleep meditations between about 6 a.m. So for the bulk of people, between about 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. And so YouTube recommends having video go live about 2 hours before your main audience watches your video, so that it can get in all their systems and people can then find it in the search engine. So that's why I make it go live at 4 a.m. But by having it go live at 11 p.m., because I'm not waking up at 4 a.m. or staying awake until 5 a.m. just to join everyone on for my video. I thought if I make it go live at 11 p.m., anyone who wants to watch the edited sleep story that's come from 2 weeks previously on the live session, who wants to watch it and interact with me, I can be in the live chat, because that's the idea of a premiere. So I do it as a premiere. The idea is I can then be in the live chat, and anyone who just wants to watch it and perhaps follow whatever the perhaps crazy story happens to be, they can do that, and I can be there in that live chat, chatting with people, answering questions, responding to comments, etc. Yeah, so that's kind of why I did it, because I trialed doing a premiere over on the my hair's getting so long it's starting to fall in my face. I trialed doing a premiere over on the Mind Changers YouTube channel the other day, as some of you joined me and know, and I thought, yeah, that is really easy to do. So I just thought that could be something to do. So most people obviously just listen to my sleep meditations to fall asleep, but some people like to know what happens in them and might have comments to say during them, because I know when I actually record it, like I will be tonight, so tonight for me, people might have comments. I see a couple of comments. Obviously, people will do like emojis of like a heart or an emoji of something to do with whatever, like a cat, if I've just mentioned a cat, or whatever it happens to be. And some people will do, here's an emoji of here. Yeah, they'll say, "Oh, I like that bit," or whatever it happens to be. But because you know that I'm busy telling a story, you keep the live chat nice and quiet generally while I'm doing the story creating, because I'm obviously trying to create a story. And we often discuss over on Facebook a little bit about what people liked or whatever, what comments you've got about the story. So I was thinking it could be that people, when they listen back to something, that they end up being able to listen to it with me present as well, and then discuss it and sort of talk about different bits and pieces of it, whatever. People might not want to, and I might sit there with no one in the live chat except me, and everyone else might just be listening along and falling asleep, which is obviously what it's designed for. But I just thought it was something to give it a go. There is something else, obviously, another good thing for doing premieres, something that I'm sure people probably notice if you look at the different comments on my videos, is the amount of comments I get from people saying, oh, it'd be great if you could do these weekly or something. And I literally, apart from missing 1 week, I literally have posted weekly every single week since 2015. Yeah, 2015. So I'm in the 5th year of posting every single week. Back in 2015 and 2016, it was 5 times a week. Now it's down to once a week here and once a week on the Mind Changers channel. But the number of comments I get where people, even though I say I post every week, and even though I post on the same day every single week at the same time every single week, the number of people who seem to still not realize that I post at the same day and same time every single week, and then end up missing, like they'll say, oh, I love this new video, and it will be on a video that's like a month old, and they've totally not realized that I've had anything since then. So if you do a premiere, what happens is that shows up on people's feed. So that's another advantage of a premiere, that it shows up on people's feeds. People will then see in advance, oh, there's a sleep meditation coming up, and because it's coming up, they'll, in theory, know it's going to be there if they're subscribed. Obviously, if they're not subscribed, they don't see that. But if they're subscribed, they'll see it just sitting there on their feed, that there's one due in the future. And it should say the time in whatever your local time zone is. Yep, that's the sort of thing I'd be able to answer, why I decided to take certain routes that I did. Possibly even why I didn't say certain things. I don't know. I'm sure depending on the story, there could be different things people might have questions for. Sometimes there's things that have been suggested and I just don't bring them up or whatever. And it might be that it just didn't fit with the story as far as I was going with the story, and that it would be a bit odd to try and shoehorn something in. Other times I do shoehorn things in, just because I know that it's been suggested lots and hasn't been in a video for a while. So, we've had things like polar bears, I think it was, that just wasn't used for like 3 or 4 weeks or something. And so I made an effort to make sure it was going to be used. But yeah, it's then twice a week that you get to interact with me. Once with me staring at a camera, and once where I'll be joining you in the live chat, being able to respond to comments as an invisible person, like all of you are. Not saying you're invisible as people, as humans, but you know what I mean. You're not visible on the screen. So yeah, it's just something to try and see how it goes. And I don't mind being up at sort of 11 till whatever time the story finishes, but I'm not going to be doing it at 4 a.m. So a mermaid handing you a plate of strawberries. What mermaid's that? I vaguely remember a story with a mermaid handing you strawberries. And that was, I think, the choice of it being strawberries was because of the fact that that's what was suggested in the chat. The strawberries were one of the suggestions. I'm trying to remember which story that was. How long ago? It's not one I recall editing yet, I don't think. Or is it? Just trying to see. But someone had suggested strawberries, and so I thought, how do I get strawberries into here? And I decided that a mermaid would offer it, I assume. The last one, there was lots of food I didn't include. But yeah, something like that being in it is normally because there's someone has suggested something random, like could I include strawberries in it? And if it crops up, then I end up doing that. So let's get some ideas. I use my new purple pen. I'm going to try not to get it all down me. So I think there are some ideas that have already been suggested, but I can't see them. So if anyone can remember what they were, feel free to repost them. Yeah, using my purple pen. Because I don't want to scroll back and then end up not being able to catch up again. Penguins again. Deck of cards. Abby bought me a deck of cards, which turned out to be 2 decks of cards, but the other day. A maze. Bubbles. Cucumber seems to get suggested every week. I've no idea why. I don't think it's the same person suggesting it every week. I don't think you suggested it last week. Lavender. Oh yes, I posted a bonus story, as those of you on the podcast will know, that has aliens in. trouble with this ink is I'm going to smudge it with my hand. Obviously, I never know whose ideas I'm using at the point of using them. I just see what fits with whatever the story is. A castle. You typed annoying animals into Google and the kangaroo jumped out at you. Yeah, I often use things like that as the metaphors, and you're unconscious and things like that, or plays on words. Pandas and robots are two different things, suggestion-wise. Right. That's pretty much the bottom of my list. Right, that's the bottom of my list. Not fitting any more on my page. Let's put my pen down somewhere safe. Somewhere hopefully it won't go missing. And we're a couple of minutes late, but that's not too bad. Let's just make sure I can read my handwriting. Move the arms of the chair. Yeah, I'd hate to be trapped in conversation. Nothing worse than people wanting to talk to you. So, everything's on. 35 minutes, 22 seconds. So just take a moment to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to relax, I don't know whether you'll drift deeper to the sound of my voice or to the spaces between my words. As you begin to comfortably drift asleep, you can have a sense of a man walking down to a seafront. He's walking through soft golden sand, feeling the warmth of that sand under his feet, carrying a paddleboard under his arm. And he walks all the way down to the water's edge. You can feel the warmth of that sun beating down on his face, on his body. You can hear the sound of the sea gently rolling in to the shore. And he walks into that sea. And once he's walked in up to his waist, he climbs up onto the paddleboard. He begins to head along the coast. He heads away from the sandy area of the beach and starts heading along where the beach begins to get rockier, and then a gradual cliff begins to form. And as he keeps balance on the board, while the waves just gently roll in underneath him, and he can hear them as they land on the shore. He heads past those rocks, away from all the people who are back on that beach. And he starts to head around past the cliffs. And that cliff gets higher and higher the further round he goes. And after some time of paddling along in front of the cliffs, he can see a small sheltered bay, just a small area of sand. And the cliffs are steep either side of that small bay and steep all around the bay. He starts paddling towards that bay and lets the water take him in that last little bit to the shore. He heads up the sand. And in the foot of the cliff here is a small cave. He walks into that cave. Heads deeper and deeper into the cave. He can hear the sound of the sea behind him, as the sound of the waves echoes down the cave and back up again. He can hear the echoing sound of his footsteps. And deep in this cave he finds what he came here looking for. He discovers a chest. And he gets a rock, bashes the lock off of this chest, creaks open the lid, and inside there's just a pile of loose papers. And he can see that some of the papers have started to deteriorate and started to crumble. And so he very carefully picks up those papers and he carries those papers out with him, back out to that beach, to that little bit of sand in this bay. And he sits down just in the shade under the cliff. And he takes a look at those papers. And he can see the writing on the papers and a map on the papers. And he can see that some bits have little areas that are missing where the paper has deteriorated. But he thinks that he's got the gist of what he came looking for. He puts that into a watertight bag and heads back the way he came, back along that shoreline, along the edge of the cliff, past the rocks, and back to that sandy beach. And he's surprised that nobody had been there before him. But unless you'd been in front of that cliff and all the way to the bay, you never would have known that that cave was there. And he leaves the beach, gets into a truck, and continues his journey. He now knows where he needs to head. And he heads away from the beach and begins to head into some dense forest, driving through that dense forest either side of the road. And as he heads further and further inland, so he can begin to see a mountain range in the distance. And he continues through that forest, sees the sun passing across the sky, sees that sun setting, sees the moon rising in the sky, the stars in the sky. Then as that moon is high in the sky, so he finally arrives at those mountains. He pulls up his truck, takes it off-road, drives to a secluded spot, and sets up camp for the night. He sets up a tent, he digs a small pit, he creates a small fire in that pit, lights that fire, and sits listening to that crackling fire, watching the dancing light, having some food to eat that he cooks on that fire, and smelling the smell of that food, feeling the cool evening breeze on his face. And as the fire burns down to embers, just occasionally popping and just glowing with a gentle orange glow. He settles back in the tent. You can hear the sound of the sides of the tent, just waving gently in the breeze. The sounds of nature beyond the tent. The rustling sounds of the trees. The slight whistling as the wind passes around the mountains. As he feels a deep sense of calm and relaxation to those sounds of nature, and drifts so peacefully and comfortably asleep. And as he wakes up the next morning, he packs everything away. He prepares himself for the climb up the mountain. He double checks his route, where he's aiming for, and then starts to ascend. And he finds the beginning of the journey easy. But then after a while, the temperature begins to drop. The wind begins to pick up. And then a little further, he finds himself walking on snow and encountering icy patches and crunching his way through that snow as he climbs higher and higher up the mountain, having to protect his eyes at times from the snow blowing in his face. And after some time of climbing, he notices a clear patch. He suspects that that's where the cave is. He heads towards that clear patch. He sees a small cave entrance, walks into that cave, out of the wind. And the first thing he does is sits down inside that cave entrance, catches his breath. It just takes a few moments to appreciate how far he's come, to gaze out, back down that mountain, see the route that he took. He can hear that wind whistling past the cave, just the occasional bit of breeze getting into the cave. And he gets his torch out, starts walking into the cave, footsteps echoing, the whistling sound of the wind. As that sound echoes from outside, down into the cave, and then reverberates and heads back out again. And the deeper he walks into the cave, the deeper the sound of the wind is. Then he starts to hear the distant sound of dripping, and notices that the cave is becoming warmer. As he walks deeper and deeper into this mountain. And after a while, he feels that the cave where he is now seems to be a steady, comfortable temperature. He wonders whether it's far enough away from the outside that the temperature just remains a constant, comfortable temperature here. And at this point, he finds that this cave opens up into a larger chamber. He shines his torch around the chamber. And the chamber looks like it was created by hand. And he wonders whether the entire cave was created by hand. And over on one wall, he sees some symbols. And so he heads over to that wall. He gets out those sheets of paper. He notices that some of these symbols match with what's on the wall. He takes a closer look at the symbols and realizes that each one looks like it might move, almost like a button. So he presses one of them, the first one listed on the paper. And he hears the sound of stone sliding on stone. He then goes and finds the second symbol that was on the paper. He pushes that symbol, and hears another sound in a different location of stone sliding on stone. He does the same with a third symbol and a fourth symbol. And he sees that the fifth symbol is on the ground and is on a large square. And he tries pushing it, and nothing happens. He jumps on it, and it moves ever so slightly. He realizes he's just not heavy enough to push down this stone. So he goes searching around the cavern and eventually finds a large boulder against a wall. And he struggles and pulls that boulder away from the wall. And then, leaning his back on the wall, he starts pushing the boulder with his feet until it's far enough away from the wall to be able to put his hands on the boulder and try and push it along the ground, pushing his foot against the wall for extra leverage. And with some struggle, he manages to get it all the way over to the button. And then he finds that it's stuck against the button. He can't slide it on top of the button. So he then sits down on the floor next to the boulder with his legs bent, puts his hands as much under the boulder as he can, and then stands himself up, using his body, leveraging that boulder up as it tips over and lands on the button. And as it does, he hears a really loud sound of stone moving, a whirring sound. And then the wall just seems to crack and crumble and then slide. And the surface seems to fall away. And right behind it is a door that slides open, revealing a tunnel that looks incredibly smooth, almost like polished marble. And his torch just reflects off the floor, the walls, and just so easily reflects bouncing its way down this tunnel. And he walks into this tunnel with his footsteps echoing, almost like he's walking through a church. He's unsure where he's going and where this is leading him. He has this feeling like he obviously must be walking deeper and deeper into this mountain range. But he's now curious. Who had the technology to build this? He thought that it would have taken a lot of hard work to chisel away the entire tunnel and cave he'd just been through, but to create this mechanism, and then to create this tunnel with such perfectly polished stone. And while those thoughts go round in his mind, he continues walking down this tunnel. And at the end of the tunnel, he sees what looks like a stone door that slides sideways. And he's surprised at how easily that slides open, almost as if it's weightless on runners. It barely makes a noise as he slides that open, walks through into this chamber, hoping this is where he'll find what he's been looking for. But inside this chamber, he notices that there's a blue glow, almost like a spinning, pulsing light in the middle of the chamber. And he walks up to that spinning, pulsing light. He walks around it. And as he walks around it, he can't feel any temperature coming from it, but he has this sense that it almost looks like a blue star floating in the middle of this cavern. And it's obviously not as big as a star, but just how it looks, he's got that sense that it's almost like a blue star floating in this cavern, with that light radiating out, his shadow dancing on the walls as that blue light pulses and swirls. And while he walks around it, he takes a look at the ground beneath it, and he can see a slightly raised, circular plinth just beneath it. And he has this temptation to reach out and try and touch this light, but he's unsure about its safety. So he has a look around the room, and on not finding anything, he looks in his bag, takes out a pencil, and holds the pencil gently towards the light. And he places the first half of that pencil into the light, and then he pulls it back out again, and the pencil seems perfectly fine. And he wonders whether it's safe to put your hand into the light. So he tries that pencil again. He moves to other parts of this light, testing in different places, and the pencil keeps seeming fine. And he notices that on the plinth there seems to be some symbols. And he's curious what they mean. He can see one that to him almost looks like a snowflake. you can see another symbol that almost looks like a representation of a star. Another symbol looks like a planet with rings around it. And he takes a look at these different symbols. And he can't work out what they mean. And then while standing in front of that snowflake, he reaches out with his hand into the light. And he very carefully puts the tips of his fingers into the light, and then allows the rest of his hand to follow. And it doesn't feel like anything. And so he carries on putting his hand through. And as his whole arm starts entering the light, so he notices that his hand's feeling a little bit cold. But other than that, it seems perfectly fine. And so he decides to step into the light. And as he steps into the light, suddenly he finds himself with the light behind him spinning and pulsing in the sky. But surrounding him seems to be just miles and miles of snow. Just very flat snow. And breaking through that snow in some places are little rocky outcrops. And then off in the distance, he thinks he can see some very distant mountains. He turns around and walks on the spot, can hear the cracking of that snow beneath his feet. And it seems quite dark here, like the sun is either just setting or just rising. And he can hear a noise in the distance. So he decides to go and explore. He heads towards that noise, trudging through deep snow, until eventually he finds himself getting closer and closer to a coastline. You can hear the sound of big, heavy waves thundering down onto a shore. And then he hears the sounds of birds. And he finds himself looking down over a colony of penguins, all huddled together, with the ones on the inside gradually working their way towards the outside, the ones on the outside gradually working their way towards the inside, all huddled together. And occasionally, some would head down to the water, and others would be heading back from the water. And he headed back towards that floating ball of light. And before passing through it, he tried to take a moment to think about what might be going on, where this might be. He could see that here, as he dug with his foot just a little bit into the snow, there was a plinth just like the one in the cave, back in that chamber. And he could see that where his footsteps were, where he came out, The symbol there resembled a mountain. And so he stepped back through that light and found himself back in the peace and calm of the cave. And he wondered whether the different symbols meant that you would end up in different places. So he walked around to one of the other symbols. And the symbol looked like water. And as he stepped through the light while facing this symbol, he found himself splashing down into some warm water. And he could see that light glowing, pulsing in front of him, while he bobbed around and around in that water. And as he turned around, all he could see in every direction was water. And just as he was about to swim back through that light, thinking that this isn't somewhere he wants to be for too long, a woman seemed to appear in front of him from under the water. She spoke to him. She told him that they haven't had any visitors through the portal for a very long time. And she explained that she can take him somewhere where she can better tell him what's going on, maybe fill him in on some information. She said, but to go there, you're going to have to trust me. She said she needs to touch him on the shoulder, and he needs to close his eyes and count down from 10. And as he does, some changes will happen. So she touched him on the arm. He closes his eyes. And while her hand is resting just on the top of his shoulder, he starts to count down from 10, 9, 8. And as he counts, he notices his breathing deepening, his exhales lengthening. He begins to notice the sounds seeming to fade away into the background. 7, 6, 5, 4. He has this sense almost like the waves are slowing down and everything's becoming more still. 4, 3, 2, 1. And as he opens his eyes, he finds that he's underwater, and that this woman seems to have a tail and seems to rapidly be swimming him down deeper and deeper under the water. And he realizes that he seems to be breathing perfectly fine. He's making all the motions for breathing, despite being underwater. And the mermaid's still holding his shoulder. And he's surprised that he didn't notice himself go from the surface to being underwater. but he just assumed that he was perhaps becoming more absorbed in the moment because of breathing calmly and counting down. And then he saw a glow begin to come into view in the distance, in the darkness of being underwater. As he got closer and closer, he discovered that it looked like a giant emerald palace. And they arrived at that emerald palace, and he could see what looked like an entrance into the palace. And it was just slightly hazy, almost like there was a very fine film of bubbles over that entrance. And the mermaid and the man swam through that haze and landed with the mermaid's tail turning into feet and legs. They landed on their feet. And the man felt dry, as if he hadn't even been in the water. And he was surprised by this. He was surprised at how he managed to land on his feet. And they walked into the main part of this palace. And while walking, the mermaid explained that they have an area where the pressure is the same as the water pressure, but it's a dry area. And that pressure surrounds you in that area. So although it's dry, it's almost like dense air. It's almost as dense as the water. So that you pass into it and just gradually land on your feet and can walk through it. And that she's able to project a protective film around whoever she touches, and that's how she got him down here. And she walks him through this palace into a library. And in this library, he just sees vast numbers of books, scrolls, and many other items. And she walks over to one of the scrolls, takes that scroll. They go and sit down. And she explains to him that this is a water world. And that these portals were left on different worlds by an ancient alien civilization. And that alien civilization is still around. They continue to explore the galaxy. But they leave portals between key locations. Some of those locations are other locations on the planet the portal is on, for fast travel to those key locations on the planet. Other locations are planets to visit. And she explains that this planet is a water world. And so really you need to be prepared for the water world if you visit here. And that if you're just going to walk through the portal, you need to be aware that there are risks with that. That you could end up just in outer space. And the man thought about the different symbols that he saw. And he realized that some of the symbols did look like strange planets, did look like space. And the mermaid explained that they are also an advanced civilization. They've been around for longer than the portals have been on the planet. And they explain that they have some technology that can help. And they hand the man what looks like a tiny metal rod. And they tell him that if he just puts that in his mouth, sideways, that'll allow him to breathe wherever he is. And it'll project a suit around him. And that suit will allow him to swim in deep water. It'll protect him from the cold, from the heat. It'll allow him to fly in space and fly in gas planets. And it will allow him to explore. And he asks why she's helping, given that he's clearly not from a race of beings that's this advanced. And she explains that he's the first person who's come through this portal in a very long time. And he seems like an explorer. And he talks to her about how he was on the search for some missing knowledge, that he'd found some documents, and they led him to the portal. And now he thinks he knows what it is that he was searching for, that the portals were the source of the knowledge he was looking for. And he heads back with that mermaid all the way back to the portal. He passes through that portal from the same direction as he came out. He finds himself back in that cave. He tries out that little device, puts it in his mouth. He feels a slight tingling, as if a little bit of electricity has passed through his mouth from it. And he looks at his hands, and he can see a very slight shimmer across his hands. And he walks around this portal, looking at the symbols. And he sees a symbol for a tree. And he steps through the portal. And as soon as he arrives through the portal, he can hear the sound of a dense forest, birds, other animals, rustling leaves. But he notices that this forest is very different from forests on Earth. He instantly knows that this isn't on Earth. He sees that there seems to be little communities, tiny little houses around the base of some of the trees. And he sees little, what he would call pixies, roaming around the base of those trees, interacting, going about their lives. As he looks up, he notices sparkling light flash in front of him, darting through the trees. Slight buzzing, flapping wing sound. And then notices that these are fairies as they stop momentarily and check him out and then carry on with their business. And next to one of the trees, he can see a ladder. It seems to be a rope ladder going high up in the tree. So he decides to follow that ladder. He climbs that ladder high up in the tree. He's surprised at how high these trees go while remaining very wide and seeming not to sway. And up in the tree, he's surprised to find there's an entire community here of small squirrel-sized teddy bear looking creatures. That seem so fluffy and so soft. They seem to have large eyes. And the canopy of the trees so dense that very little light is getting to this area. And all those small little squirrel-sized teddy bears just seem to be going about their business. You can see some hanging around what almost looks like a little pub up here among all these places that they live. You can see some drinking. You can hear a slight squeaky sound like laughter. And they seem to be largely ignoring him. And so he just slowly, carefully walks around exploring what's almost like a town up in the trees. And although this isn't built for someone of his size, it seems to be built so well it can easily hold his weight. And eventually, a very tiny, almost the size of a little mouse, inquisitive teddy bear comes over to him. Starts walking over to him very slowly at first, and tentatively. And then when noticing that he's not a threat, it speeds up, comes straight at him, climbs up onto his foot, and starts pulling its way up his trouser leg. And he reaches down and he picks it up with his hand. And it stood on his hand while he holds his hand up in front of him. And he's looking down at that little teddy bear in his hand. And you can hear a squeaky voice sounding like it's trying to talk to him. And he doesn't understand what it's saying. So he just smiles back. And then it climbs along his arm. It hangs on to the underside of his shirt, climbing up towards his armpit and down his body again. And then it pulls on his trouser leg and starts moving forward as if to say, "Come this way." And he follows that tiny little teddy bear. And the teddy bear takes him to what seems to be almost like a main hub of buildings up here. And that little teddy bear runs up to other teddy bears. And those other teddy bears then turn around and take a look at this man who towers over them. He sits himself down so that he's at better height compared to them. And one of them comes over with what looks a bit like a didgeridoo. And they start talking with their mouth over one end of it. And out the other end, you can hear a language that he understands, almost as if somehow this translated what they were saying. And he talks back, and he can hear a squeaky, strange language coming out of the other end. And they begin to have a dialogue. And then they invite him to stay for something to eat. They've not had anyone come through this portal for a very long time. They throw a big party. They invite the Pixies, the Fairies. They have music. They have some drinks. Plenty of food. And he enjoys this unusual moment where all these animals, all these creatures and different animals that live around here, all seem to be highly intelligent and all seem to be getting on with each other. And eventually, at the end of what felt like a long time of being there, he headed back to that portal. But as he headed back, one of the fairies flew over to him, and they started talking to him. And he was stood by the portal, and he was surprised that without any technology, this fairy seemed to be able to communicate. And the fairy explained that they're magic, and so they can just communicate, and that they can understand all beings. They explained that they needed his help, that all of the beings here in the forests, they're quite small, and yet he is so much taller than they are, and stronger than they are. They explain that there's a labyrinth. It's like a maze. And that in the center of that labyrinth is something that none of them have been able to get for many lifetimes. And this is the first time in a long time that someone's been here that will have the strength to open the door in the center of the labyrinth. But you can only go in one person at a time. And so this person agrees to go into this labyrinth. They get shown through to a door that's in a tree. And through that door in the tree, they descend a spiral staircase. They open another door. And they find themselves in the labyrinth. And they know they have to find their way to the middle, open the door in the middle, get what's in the middle, and then return. And so they put their left hand on the wall and they begin to walk. And they keep their left hand on that wall until they arrive at the middle of the maze. And they struggle to open that door. And after much struggling, they manage to get it open. And inside the room behind the door, they see what looks like a clockwork robot that seems to have been turned on by the movement of the door opening. And they see its head moving, its arms moving, as if it's beginning to do something. Then they notice that in one arm, it seems to have a long sword, and its arm is moving very slowly. And it's jolting along and slightly up, and along and slightly up more. And as they watch that arm moving, they notice something's hanging from the ceiling in this room. And all of a sudden, almost in a blink of an eye, the arm springs into action, and that sword cuts straight through the thing hanging from the ceiling. And a single sheet of paper falls to the floor, and the robot becomes silent and still again. They pick up that sheet of paper. And they don't understand what's written on the paper. But they take that with them. They find their way out the same way that they found their way in, by putting a hand on the wall and just keeping their hand on the wall until they find the exit. And then they climb up that spiral staircase. They leave that tree. And they go to the fairy and they explain that there just seemed to be this sheet of paper with some writing on it. They couldn't understand what's so special about that, and why it would be so needed. And the fairy read the words that were on that sheet of paper. And as they did, the ground began to sparkle, and the sparkling spread out. And as far as the man could see in all directions through the trees, sparkles were rising, filling the forest. With a twinkling sound that seemed to be coming from everywhere. And the man wondered what was going on. And the fairy explained that this is paradise, that the whole land isn't exactly as you saw it, there was more to it in the past. And then as the lights, those sparkles begin to fade, the man notices that there are some areas of clearings with lakes, with meadows, areas where the different creatures can go out and get some daylight and see the sky. And off in one of the clearings, they notice what looks like a temple. And they walk to that temple. They take a look in the temple. And the fairy explains that the human had come here before, a very, very long time ago. Back when this used to be paradise. And they used to use that temple as a way of teaching themselves to connect with the universe, teaching themselves to be able to get their frequencies the same as the frequencies of nature. And they could become one with the world around them. And after they'd learned that, from an incredibly long time of just sitting in that temple, they left through the portal and never returned. And the man noticed that this temple looked familiar, that they'd recognized temples similar to this on Earth. And that they remember seeing a temple symbol on the portal. And all the creatures said goodbye to them as they headed back to the portal and thanked them for the support. And they walked through that portal, found themselves back in the cave, back in that chamber. They wanted to check out that temple, so they headed round to the temple symbol. And as they always do now, they put that little metal object in their mouth, just to be safe. They stepped through the portal, and they found themselves in a temple, high up in a mountain. And they looked around this temple, and there was no one here now. And as they looked out of the temple, they saw an enormous red dragon just resting there. They could see it breathing, they could hear it breathing. And they wondered where here was. And they saw the dragon's eye open as it became aware of them. And then the dragon rose its head up, turned to fully face the man, and looked straight at him inside the temple, and spoke with a deep, booming voice. And the man was able to understand this dragon. And the dragon spoke about being the guardian of this temple, and asked the man some questions to find out the man's intentions. The man explained he wanted to learn more about this temple, about who was here and what the person that was here had learned. And the dragon rested its head back down, as if to say carry on, as if to show trust. And the man sat down on a thin cushion that was placed in the centre of this temple. He picked up a small stick that was next to the cushion. He tapped it gently on a bowl that was in front of him, and he could hear a ringing from that bowl. He put that stick back down beside him. He closed his eyes and focused all of his attention on that ringing of that bowl, on almost being able to perceive how that ringing is happening within the bowl and around the outside of the bowl. Almost being able to perceive the vibrations of the bowl. And as he focused on the vibrations of that bowl, he started to notice his breathing change. And then he noticed what was almost like sonic pulses beaming up from the bowl in front of him. That increased in speed until, with his eyes closed, he had this feeling that in front of him was a pillar of sound, a pillar of vibration, almost like a laser beam, but with sound instead of light. That increased and increased until he couldn't distinguish one pulse from the next, almost like a continuous beam at such a high frequency. And as he continued to focus on the bowl, he almost felt his consciousness be drawn into that bowl and then beamed up out of the bowl, following that beam of sound, and then seeming to almost join the frequency of the universe, where he suddenly felt this connection. He suddenly lost awareness of his body and seemed to almost be just a mind floating in space, a mind that was timeless, that was connected to everything, while not connected to anything. It was almost just like an observer, remaining non-attached. Like a juggler not focusing on any one ball. Or someone multitasking and not focusing on any one task. Or even walking and not focusing on the walking. Just having an awareness of the moment. And as he held that and began to learn how to hold that, he then started learning to gently direct it, to gently direct his awareness to consciousnesses anywhere in the universe. And while doing this, he suddenly got a smell of lavender. And with that smell of lavender, he heard a voice that seemed to be coming from within his mind. And that voice explained that they were one of the aliens that left the portal. And that they can communicate with those who can access this state of consciousness, that it allows for communication throughout the galaxy. It allows for timeless communication, for an understanding of the universe to the level of realizing that we are the fabric of space-time, rather than being separate from space-time. So we don't have to use technologies within space that have to travel through time, that make interstellar travel too difficult, because you can never communicate fast enough to make it worth communicating with ships light years away. Before you can spread into the universe, the species needs to learn to raise their consciousness. And it's only with this higher consciousness, it's only with this ability to communicate in a timeless way that a species is then ready to venture into interstellar space. And this man learns so much from the experience that he almost feels lightheaded from the amount of knowledge he's been gaining. And as he meditates there, so the sun, this planet's going around, sets, the stars rise, and after many hours of meditating, he feels ready and aware of a sense of control over his ability to leave this place back through that portal. And he heads back through that portal, and he knows he has so much more he can explore here. But he realizes he's been here for such a long time already. That he decides to leave this location. He descends the mountain. And over the coming months, he camps at the foot of the mountain while building himself a cabin at the foot of this mountain. With the idea of learning more, of exploring more through those portals, and gaining more knowledge. And while learning all this knowledge, he looks at how he can simplify that knowledge by writing it down and looking at different ways to explain things. And every night, he settles down, normally sitting in front of a warm fire, drinking a warm drink, often finding himself shuffling a pack of cards, looking at those different cards, feeling those cards in his hands, allowing his mind to drift into a meditative state, and then using those cards as he connects with the wider universe, where he realizes that he's able to begin to name the cards before he sees them, almost like by learning to be timeless, he begins to have a sense beyond time. And he begins his long journey of inner discovery, looking at how he'll share that with the world. Every night, going to bed and drifting and floating so comfortably and relaxed asleep, waking each morning feeling so invigorated, excited with the day that he's got to look forward to, and the new learnings and the new understandings, all the wonder and curiosity. As he drifts and floats into dreams of excitement, asleep.